A firm handshake, and then it was straight down to business. The Israeli Prime Minister wasted no time warning UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres about his country's forever foe.
Iran is busy turning Syria into a base of military entrenchment, and it wants to use Syria and Lebanon as war fronts against its declared goal to eradicate Israel. It is also building sites to produce precision-guided missiles towards that end in both Syria and in Lebanon.
Netanyahu was referring to this picture provided to him by an Israeli satellite company. Local analysts say it's identical to a similar site that they believe is located inside Iran. The Israeli Prime Minister said it's proof Tehran is preparing to build weapon factories in Syria's northwestern region, a claim he's made before, but now he wants the world to know. As well as meeting the UN Secretary-General, he's met President Vladimir Putin in Moscow to deliver exactly the same message: Iran is the enemy. Israel has largely stayed out of its neighbour's backyard for the past 6.5 years of war in Syria. But in recent months, several incidents have forced it to become involved. Like in March, when Syrian state media reported regime forces had shot down an Israeli jet flying in its airspace over Palmyra, Israel denies the claim. And then in April, Syria's military said Israel shot down a projectile southwest of Damascus International Airport. But it was a stray rocket into Israel's territory in June that provoked the most direct and focused response yet.
המדיניות שלנו ברורה, איננו מקבלים טפטוף מכל סוג שהוא. לא מרגמות, לא רקטות, לא זליגת ירי, מכל סוג שהוא, בכל חזית שהיא. אנחנו מגיבים בעוצמה על כל פגיעה בשטחנו או באזרחינו.
But Israel's real beef isn't with Syria. It's with Iran and Hezbollah, who both fight alongside Assad's forces. Israel says Tehran is providing Hezbollah with better weapons for its next war against it, and believes Tehran is deliberately arranging ceasefires in de-escalation zones in southern Syria, so it will have a stronger presence near Israel's borders. So could this mean that if Iran is indeed inching closer to Israel's front door, it will step outside and meet the threat head-on? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by Ksenia Svetlova. She's a member of Israel's parliament with the opposition Zionist Union Party. And in Washington, D.C., we have a former military intelligence officer and current senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, Michael Pregent. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Ksenia Svetlova, let me begin with you. These satellite images that are causing a fuss right now, do they tell you what Prime Minister Netanyahu says they should tell you?
Absolutely, absolutely. We are very much concerned by what is going on in Syria and also in Lebanon within the frame of expansion of the Iranian interests there, and especially of the creating of new facilities for the creation of rockets. So this is definitely something that should be a red line for all of us here in Israel, never mind if it's coalition or opposition. And I think that in this regard, the Prime Minister should be even more perhaps concerned than he is. He raised this issue with Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, but then we never saw a continuation. We never saw a reply. We never saw that Putin indeed believes that just like us that these plants should not be stationed in Syria. That this is a threat to regional security.
Okay, and I'm going to broaden it out to Russia in a few minutes' time, but I want to kind of stay focused with regards to the intentions of the Iranians for the moment. Michael Pregent, why can't it be no more than the Iranians just shoring up their support for Bashar al-Assad, where they've intervened, they've decided to back him, and these are the fruits of them backing him as they try to ensure that he wins the war? Why can't it be just that?
Well, because we have to pay attention to what Iran is doing. They've tried to smuggle these rockets across Iraq through Syria and into Lebanon, and now they've actually been able to, they've come to the conclusion that why smuggle them when we can simply build them here in Syria? These are definitely the rewards of supporting Assad, and also the rewards of partnering with Russia in Syria. Again, Russia's moving air defense assets into these areas where these factories are being built, these factories to produce precision surface-to-surface missiles. And of course, Israel should be concerned, as should the United States and the rest of the international community, that Iran plans to increase Hezbollah's capability to punish Israel if Iran is attacked for their nuclear program or if Iran is attacked for anything else. This is the response that they want the international community and the U.S. to weigh. What is the response from Iran if Iran is attacked for militarizing its nuclear program? And the conclusion by most analysts that cover the Middle East is Hezbollah will punish Israel. Well, this increases or enhances Hezbollah's ability to do that.
So, Ksenia Svetlova, you're in the opposition, but, I mean, this is a national security issue here, part of national defense, and a lot of the time people on both sides of the aisle then come together. What's the end game here then? If all sides within Israel, regardless of the political divide, consider the Iranian influence in Lebanon and Syria as escalating, does that mean that all sides would support an escalation from the Israeli side? Does that mean Israel getting, let's start with Syria first. Is Israel going to get more involved in Syria and get sucked into that war?
Well, Israel tried its best for the last 6 years not to get involved in the Syrian crisis. We are sitting on the borders, we are very close to Syria, but however, we tried our best not to be driven into this bloody conflict and to, as far as we can, to stay away from it. However, now I believe, and so do many experts here in Israel, that it's beginning increasingly difficult, not only when we see the satellite images of the plants, where Scud missiles will be created and produced. But also given that the current agreement on the de-escalation zones in southern Syria, which basically allow Iran to get closer to our borders with the proximity of 3-4 miles. If you ask me, then of course, as a member of Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, I would tell you that the last thing that I want is to drag our country into some kind of war and to destabilize, the regional security and to destabilize again the situation here in the Middle East. I would prefer an international action because I believe that no country, in fact, gains from Iran acquiring new bases here in Syria and also in Lebanon. I think that all of the Gulf countries, of course, should fear this moment. All of the Arab Sunni countries, I think also Turkey, should be very, very concerned by what is going on because we are speaking about very fragile relations, with Ankara. So I think that, also the United States, of course, the European Union, should do everything possible to, first of all, try to drive some kind of international action against that. And if it will not be successful, then, perhaps we'll have to resort to some other means.
Michael Pritchard, isn't there a paradox here in the sense that a few years ago, the war was far worse and there was less of a threat to the Israelis, I guess, because when the war gets simmered down, it involves bringing in the Iranians, it involves bringing in the Russians, and involves maybe possibly having to accept that Assad gets to stay. So is the paradox that then that peace would be bad for Israel, which would ignite more war?
Well, based on your question, if you look at Iran's actions after the Iran deal, the JCPOA, it basically emboldened their activities. It allows them to shore up Assad in Syria. And then Qasem Soleimani went to Moscow to invite Russia in to Syria. So Iran has actually stepped up its activities, and those activities have actually benefited Assad. He looks more entrenched now. The international community is starting to say that it may not be a matter of fact that Assad has to go, that maybe there is a way for him to stay, and I think that's where everybody's leaning at this point. The issue here with Iran is Iran's strategic calculus is to have this land bridge, through Tehran, Baghdad, Damascus, and into Lebanon, to be able to threaten Israel. The calculus is that if they actually look like a legitimate threat to Israel, somehow that might push Sunni Arab countries back into their sphere of influence, meaning that Iran has actually demonstrated a capability to threaten Israel and therefore it might unite the Arab countries behind Iran. That's their strategic calculus. So we need to do something now before they get to that point.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Ksenia, let me then ask you about Lebanon. How likely do you think that there'll be another war?
Well, until very recently, I think every single expert in Israel that you would ask where the next war will erupt would tell you that it would not come from the south, it will come from the north. So there is a probability. We do understand that Hezbollah was also weakened by its prolonging participation in the Syrian conflict. So it perhaps might not be the immediate wish of this murderous terrorist organization to start a war against Israel. However, if we would see the continuation of leaking of the strategic weapons to this organization, this is what we see now. We are being briefed also by our sources and by our intelligent communities that Hezbollah is now laid its hands on the Yahond missiles, so earth to sea. So this is something that changed the equation altogether. So I would tell you that we are the last party that is interested in having some kind of warfare now in the region. However, it seems that the increasing of is Hezbollah ability and the new reality with having plans to produce weapons, Iranian weapons, so close to our borders. We are talking about a few miles after all, that it completely changes the equation.
Let me bring in a dissenting voice now. Joining us from Jerusalem is Amir Oren. He's from Haaretz newspaper, and he writes about defense and the government. Amir, you're hearing the other two guests saying here that Iran is an existential threat. It's shoring itself up in Syria. It's beefing itself up and targeting its military might towards Israel. The Israelis are conducting a massive military drill. It's no joke. It's the biggest in 2 decades and will go on for 10 days. The message to be sent to Hezbollah and Nasrallah. Is it justified, Amir?
Well, one should look at it proportionately. First of all, the existential threat posed by Iran is dormant now and will be dormant for the next 10 years or so because of the nuclear deal. Because conventionally, and even through its proxies, Iran does not pose such a grave threat to Israel. Yes, it is a nuisance. It could open a second front in Syria or from Syria if there is one from Lebanon between Hezbollah and Israel. But Israel can cope with that. Regarding the exercise, it's really a headquarters exercise done by officers at their desks mostly. Of course, there are planes and ships in the air or at sea, but these are not army divisions maneuvering towards the border. Yes, there are tens of thousands in the formations involved, but they have not been called up. It's only their commanders and staff officers. Israel is trying to get in better shape to prepare for the eventuality, but it has no interest in precipitating anything now, and it has a double message for Hezbollah and for Iran. One is that, yes, we are better prepared than we were 11 years ago, but no, we have no intentions of having a self-fulfilling prophecy, saying that war is imminent and then bringing it about.
Okay, let's ask Michael Pregent. Is it a chicken and egg thing here? Because if you're Hezbollah and your old enemy, one of the largest military-industrial complexes in the world per capita, is conducting such a drill, you're waiting for the opportunity to feel provoked by the Israelis and say, you see, you're provoking us, so we've got to prepare ourselves. Isn't that the way it works in game theory?
It's exactly how it works in game theory. I just wanted to take one point that the last speaker said. I think the Iran deal it's not a constraining thing. It doesn't constrain Iran's actions. It's actually emboldened Iran's actions. They've been more of a destabilizing force post JCPOA than they were before that. But back to your point about Hezbollah being basically tempted to react based on this Israeli military exercise. There's a new dynamic at play. Putin is actually protecting these sites. He's actually warned Netanyahu not to strike Iran or its proxies in Syria. And that's an added element here because Putin's air defense assets can actually shoot down Israeli jets. This isn't the S-300 that the Israelis have trained against. This is the S-400. This has the ability to shoot down American aircraft as well. So there's a new dynamic here. I hope, I agree with the last speaker as well, that this is not an immediate threat, but we have to pay attention to what Iran's doing now, because Iran's paying attention to what the U.S. response to North Korea, in that one of our biggest deterrents to doing something against North Korea is the fact that North Korea can punish South Korea. Iran's trying to create the same capability in Syria and Lebanon to be able to punish Israel so that it's a deterrent to U.S. action against Iran.
Ksenia, let me ask you about Hassan Nasrallah. In 2006, at the time that Israel and Hezbollah went to war with each other, and invariably because of the makeup of Lebanon, it was essentially Israel going to war with almost 2/3 of Lebanon and causing a lot of destruction. The war was ugly. At that time, Nasrallah was seen as a hero throughout the Arab and Muslim world, which is, I guess, 90% Sunni. He was a hero because he was fighting the Israelis. He lost a lot of that goodwill because of the Syrian war. Hezbollah lost a lot of that goodwill by supporting Bashar al-Assad. Yeah. Do you really want to hand that back to him by giving him another war and making Hezbollah heroes of the Middle East and heroes of the broader Muslim world again?
Well, first of all, I would say I assume that nothing, even war with Israel, would not bring back to Hassan Nasrallah and to his organization that was proclaimed by Arab Sunni states, some of them as terrorist organization. Something that, for example, Russia is still reluctant to do, and perhaps will never do it altogether. This is, as for the perceptions and to how it's being perceived now by the Arab Sunni world, because people are also following what Hezbollah is being involved in on the side of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and what kind of casualties it caused on the civilian population in Syria. So this is first of all. But second of all, I will also join all of the previous speakers and say and repeat also what I said in the beginning of the program. The last thing that Israel is interested in now is a war with Hezbollah or with any other Iranian proxy in Syria or in Lebanon. However, learning from the dynamics of this region, we know that almost anything can drag us into this war. For example, in 2016, in winter, we almost had an accident in which Hezbollah was shooting on our patrol next to the northern border, close to Lebanon. 2 soldiers were killed, but you know what? If 12 would be killed or 20 would be killed, God forbid, then we could find ourselves in a very nasty situation in which we would be obliged to reply. And now, with having Iran getting closer and closer to our borders, this probability grows, unfortunately.
Right. At the heart of all of this, we're hearing from both Michael and Ksenia that the Russians seem to pull the strings here when it comes to Iran's actions. And I guess that's why Israel's so frustrated that Russia's not doing anything despite their complaints. Let's listen to what Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov told a news conference in the Qatari capital Doha recently. He said, "We do not have any information that someone is preparing an attack on Israel. Whatever area of cooperation between Iran and Syria, my position is that if their cooperation in whichever field does not violate the basic provisions of international law, it should not be cause for question." Amir Oren, that must be driving Prime Minister Netanyahu absolutely bananas, because the Russians are saying, none of our business, stay out of our business.
Well, bananas are quite available in Israel and they are relatively inexpensive. So Netanyahu can take some comfort in that. But some of the headlines which came out of the Putin-Netanyahu meeting were exaggerated. As far as we know, those factories, rocket factories, which the Iranians are planning to build in Lebanon in order to bypass the very successful Israeli interdiction of such munitions being transported from Syria, they are only in the planning stage. Nothing has been built yet, and Netanyahu wanted to tell Putin, to ask Putin to tell his friends in Tehran and in Beirut to stop doing whatever they had in mind. It is not an imminent danger to Israel, and therefore there is no cause for any preemptive strike here. And the questions that one should ask oneself is, What are the interests? What are the motives? Why should anyone go to war now? What is the reason for breaking the status quo? For Israel, for Russia, and perhaps for the population of Lebanon, the answer is there is no reason. If Hezbollah and Iran find some pretexts, it will be very sad for the Lebanese population, because the Israelis intend, and have declared so openly, that they will strike very forcefully from day one. They will have a short campaign, a short but massive campaign, and they will stop at that. They are not going to linger on for 30 or 60 days. And the destruction on both sides will be very unfortunate.
Michael Pregent, do you believe that this is the beginning of Iranian empire building in the region as a result of that Iran deal? I mean, Amir Oren, like others, see it as something that defangs the Iranians. You see it the other way. So are we going to see more Iranian influence?
Well, everything hinges on whether or not we give Iran access to the US dollar. I believe they've already spent the $150 billion that was unfrozen and given back to the Iranians. They're counting on investment in Iran, and that's not going to happen as long as the Revolutionary Guard has its tentacles in every aspect of Iran's economy. So Iran could actually not be able to afford to continue these things. But I still see the JCPOA as an unconstraining event, not a constraining event. And if you look at what Iran has been able to do in Iraq with its proxies and Syria, you know, the imminent threat, everybody talks about, is this an imminent threat? It's going to be a threat in the future. They're building factories, surface-to-surface missiles, to hit Israel. You don't want to be at the point we are now with North Korea, where the only options are military options with large amounts of civilian deaths. You can do something now. I just say real quick on war. An airstrike, an air campaign for 8 hours is not war, it's an air campaign. So there are other things you can do.
Okay, I got a wrap, unfortunately. I would have loved to have continued. Lots of posturing and lots of planning. We hope there won't be more war in the region. Ksenia Svetlova, Michael Pregent, and Amir Oren, I thank you all for joining us.